I'm from NIAPers. I'm the Director of Managed Care Readiness Initiatives. I also oversee all of our webinar series and help put them together. Today, we're offering mindful supervision towards workforce effectiveness and resilience with Eve Addis. So we have just a housekeeping slide to go through before I turn it over to Eve. So Eve, if you could go to the next slide, please. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording along with the slides will be found at www.niapers.org. We are offering 1.25 CEs for today's offering, and that's for social workers, CPRP, and LMHC. So in order to qualify for CEs, you've got to be in the virtual room and not just dialed in on the telephone. And we also ask that you return a completed evaluation form within 48 hours. So everyone that's registered for today's event will receive an evaluation form, and that's for two reasons. One is we always want your feedback, so we're looking forward to that. But we also need that evaluation form from you in order to get you your CEs. So that form will be sent to you at the email address you used to register for today's event. Fill that form out within 48 hours, return that back to our office, and then you'll get your CEs shortly thereafter, probably in about a month or so. We give ourselves about 4 to 6 weeks. And I just saw a question in the chat box about CEs for certified peer specialists. So we are hoping to be able to offer some for those folks. They are not quite approved yet. They are pending, so I cannot say we can affirmatively give you those, but we can try. We also want to encourage everyone to use the chat box and type in your questions and your comments. I'll be keeping track of the chat box throughout today's presentation, and Eve has set aside some time at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you a very dear friend of NIAPers and mine, Dr. Eve Addis. Dr. Addis is the principal at Addis Integrated Health Strategies. He's a consultant in New York City and in the Hudson Valley, and he's done some work with us all over New York State, actually. He's done some work with NIAPers all over New York State. And quite frankly, he's got a really long history of working in the field and has an incredible knowledge around supervision. So we're very grateful to have him with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Eve.
Thank you, Daniela. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I want to first say that I'm very glad everybody tuned in. I know everybody's very busy and has a lot of things on their plates. So I'm glad you've taken the time out today to be with us. And I hope that, you know, at the end of this hour or so that you'll emerge sort of with some information that you can use in your daily practice, and hopefully that it will make your work as a supervisor, if you are a supervisor, or if you are an aspiring supervisor, that you'll be able to kind of use the information that we'll be giving you today to really make your supervisory experience one that is gratifying and that is purposeful for you. So today, to kind of make this
Eve, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Eve, but really, really quickly, just so that we make sure that everybody sees your comments and your questions, if you could just type them into all panelists or all panelists and attendees, that way we make sure that we actually see them. Okay, thank you.
So today we're going to kind of chop this up into 4 sections. So the first is identifying issues and challenges in supervision, then the application piece, followed by a separate piece on resilience, compassion, fatigue, and self-care. And then we'll have a summary at the end that will hopefully capture all of the preceding stuff. So let's start with what is it that draws people to work in public health? You know, behavioral health, public health, kind of are what we're all doing, what we all have committed our careers to. And we come to it not really because, as they say, because of the money. We come to it because in some way it has some personal meaning for us. So it's stimulating. We feel professionally alive when we are engaged in the work that we do. There's a moral appeal, you know, our social justice sort of sense. We want to make a difference. We want to help others. And there's satisfaction and challenge in the work that is gratifying. And then, you know, for a lot of us, I certainly know for me, when I started in the field, it was the adventure of it, you know, that I knew this was going to be extreme and challenging in certain ways, and there was an appeal for me about that. So I'm just wondering if anybody, you know, this isn't an exhaustive list, and so I don't want anybody to think that that they have they don't fit into one of these 4 bullet points, that there's something wrong. So let me ask very quickly, and you could put it in the chat box. What is it that brought you to this field? Why did you make this decision to come into public health? Put your responses in the chat box. Daniela, any entries in there about the answer to this question? Why people are attracted to this work?
Yep, we've got to help others, lived experience, make a difference, love people, desire to help. Okay,
so so there you go. Some sort of validation here from all of you. So how do then people become supervisors? You know, and this isn't, again, not an exhaustive list. So there's a natural career progression. You've been doing something for a while, and then, you know, that's the next step in your career. There's also that perhaps, you know, the desire for increased pay and benefits. Sometimes there's an expectation from the agency leadership. And then, you know, that tenure, you know, you've been on this, doing this work for a long time, and, you know, it's time to kind of go up to the next level. There's also an increased autonomy and authority, and there's a status kind of component to it in terms of being a supervisor. Anything else that anybody can think of as sort of the elevator up to supervision to becoming a supervisor? Anybody else have any other kind of motivation for becoming a supervisor? Again, in the chat box. I saw Bill Gonzalez raised his hand. Can we unmute Bill and have him, think he wants to say something?
In the meantime, we've got lots in the chat box. Tenure and a desire to share knowledge and mentoring.
That's
increasing our impact, developing thriving teams.
Great. Great. Yeah, so it's all, you know, these are all kind of related and interrelated. So thank you for your responses. I don't know what happened to Bill, but maybe he'll chime into the chat box. So as a supervisor in human services, this is what we do. This is what supervisors are sort of kind of engaged to do: inspire, teach, support, model, advocate, collaborate, evaluate, challenge, and all these things sort of fit into what kind of the essence of supervision in our field should look like, or should require. So if we looked at, you know, a Supervision 101, you know, the basics of supervision, this is what would be kind of in that job description, if you will, for the supervisor: to provide guidance and support, rely on experience and share expertise, help to problem solve, policy implementation to make sure that, you know, people working are following the organizational policies, documentation, way of ensuring that documentation is timely and correct, monitoring productivity, time and attendance, of course, monitoring adherence to job responsibilities. There's a certain level of task management, disciplinary activity, of course, when things go south, and then, you know, termination, which is kind of the ultimate and unhappy role of a supervisor. So this is what kind of the essence of supervision is, as sort of the to-do list, if you will. When you become a supervisor, this is what the expectations are. So this is just kind of what we would find pretty much across the board, regardless of the agency that you are working for. So organizationally, supervisors are expected to develop staff competencies, maintain a standard of care in the workforce, ensure a proper and consistent implementation of policies, procedures, and practices, ensure that there's regulatory oversight, and that is that, you know, the organization is in compliance with regulatory requirements, and to promote the organizational culture. Now, that last bullet, sort of that will differ depending on the organization, and in other words, what that looks like for each organization will be different, because organizational culture is specific to organizations. So this is from the perspective of administration and management. That's what supervisors are supposed to be doing. And when you look at this, and when you look at these bullets, you can see how critical supervisors are in the sustainability of an organization, because they really carry the mantle of the organization and ensure that all of the organizational imperatives, all of the organizational sort of the heart of the organization is transmitted. They are the transmitters of all that the organization represents, the mission, the vision, et cetera. So this is just to emphasize that supervisors have a very important role in organizational sustainability, and in the kind of the carrying over time of what the organization is about and what its objectives are. Now, this is important here to talk about barriers, because when we are supervisors, there are lots of things. I mean, in the previous slide, we went through kind of a listing of what supervisors are supposed to be doing, but at the same time, we work in an environment where there are barriers for maintaining and managing a talented and effective workforce. I mean, that's what we all want as supervisors. We want people who are talented and effective, and we want to hold on to them. But we have barriers in terms of that, and we can't go on and talk about supervision without identifying the barriers. Some of those barriers have to do with salary. Some of those barriers have to do with how hard it is to find talent. I mean, I know that now, in particular, at this particular moment in time, talent is hard to find. A lot of people are opting not to go into the human services field for a variety of reasons. We're also in a very competitive, managed care, and its impact on our environments have made our system and our system of care a more competitive one. The work is more demanding, as we reach out to serve more populations who have complex care needs. The work has its inherent risks, as we all know. And, some of those are kind of listed as occupational hazards, which many of you who have been in this field, whether for a long time or for not such a long time, are exposed to the pain and suffering of others. I mean, if you are a direct care person, and if you're part of a workforce that provides services and supports to people who are marginalized, or people who are otherwise impaired or impacted by sort of so many things, in addition to their behavioral health disorders, what we find is that this is, as a worker in this field, we are constantly engaging, and if we're going to be present and real, we can't help avoid being impacted by the pain and suffering of others. This could also potentially trigger our own pain and suffering. Many of us, especially people with lived experience, and basically everyone really, nobody goes through life unscathed. We all have our own kind of experiences. And when we are up against and engaging people with their own kind of experiences and difficulties, it could potentially trigger our own. And this is where, many of us have taken training on boundaries, and all of that. But even with all the training and all the knowledge, you know, our nervous systems can't necessarily ward off what it is, those things that could trigger things in us. There is that blurring of boundaries that happens inevitably, and we have to, of course, check that. But this is an occupational hazard, which could lead ultimately to compassion fatigue, which we'll get into a definition of that a little bit later on in the presentation, and finally burnout. And we have, as a field, an extraordinarily high level of turnover. We are a field that is really plagued with the moving of staff, because there is this sort of exhaustion that might set in over time. And depending on who the person is, the tolerance for these occupational hazards could be high, but for many, it's not that high, and it leads to compassion fatigue and burnout. So we have to ask ourselves these questions. How do we prepare people to become supervisors? How do we know that a person is ready to move from direct service into a supervisory role? How do we endeavor to meet the expectations of the people we employ so that they can sort of develop into supervisors? How do we keep our workforce interested, motivated, and fulfilled in their work? Now, again, we had just in one of the previous slides, this whole idea of why people come to this field. And those are all really great things that people, you know, both that was on the slide and that people chatted in. But if we don't maintain all of that, if we don't keep people interested, motivated, and fulfilled, then we're likely to lose the people, sometimes the people that are the most talented, the most motivated, and the ones who come to the field with the most to offer. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we prevent compassion fatigue and its associated loss of productivity? And then, of course, all those costs associated with recruitment and onboarding. So this has a financial component as well, is that turnover costs organizations money and loss of productivity. You know, new employees cannot be as productive as people who have been in the job for a while. And it's expensive to recruit, and it's expensive to onboard. So, you know, if you want to look at this from a purely financial perspective, it's better not to have to relentlessly be faced with vacancies and hiring and recruitment, because that costs money, and it also has a lot of other costs, because staff shortages during those periods where we have openings cause more stress on the staff that exists, that's still there, and that may kind of exacerbate their own occupational hazards or their own compassion fatigue. So it's important that, you know, we look at this in a way where we're actively seeking to keep people motivated, keep them in their jobs, and keep them, especially if they're talented people, just keep them. Because they're the ones who should ultimately move into the supervisory roles that we have. And as supervisors, we have a big responsibility, not only to kind of keep the organization sustainable, but also to do that through managing the workforce. So are there any questions about anything we've discussed so far? Anything in the chat box, Daniela?
No questions, just a few comments to keep a sharp eye on staff for the deer in the headlights look, and recognizing and rewarding staff for specific accomplishments.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. I thank all of you for making this into as much of a conversation as it can be in the time that we have. So, what is the organization? I think I'm going, yeah. What is the organizational purpose of supervision in public health? So these are the implied responsibilities, and these are not things that we find in job descriptions. These are sort of more implied. And I wanted to put this together because all those things about interest and motivation are part of the job, although we don't necessarily put them in writing. So we want to promote positive staff morale. And sometimes that's a difficult thing to do in an environment that may sort of be antithetical to that because of the demands, because of all the systemic issues that we have to deal with as nonprofits and all the political issues around that. We want to support and motivate to optimize workforce performance. So that's right. We want to optimize workforce performance, but we need to do that by providing support and by motivating. But again, by keeping people interested and by keeping the reasons that they came into this field to begin with alive. You know, we don't want them to lose that enthusiasm. We don't want them to lose all of that positive energy. We want to encourage and elicit ideas. In other words, here it's sort of where our staff as supervisors, where we can provide a space for the creativity and innovative inclinations of our workforce. That's a way to engage people, to keep that door open for them to sort of teach us, or for them to bring their own sort of creativity and innovation to the organization. We want to nurture and retain talent. Somebody mentioned mentoring in the chat. That's certainly an important part of it. And we want to do what we can so that our workforce can contribute to the optimal health outcomes of the people we serve. And so, you know, all of these things that I'm talking about, that motivation, that energy, that positive energy, that interest, without that, you know, without that presence and without that again, positive energy, we're not likely to get sort of those optimal health outcomes. And our organizations, you know, by and large, the sustainability of our organization depends on our being able to produce for our funders, for our payers. And then last but not least is workforce wellness. So in order to kind of, if we would wrap all this up under one heading, it would be workforce wellness. We want to keep our workforce well so that they can act in a way that not only results in optimal health outcomes of the people we serve, but overall contribute to an organization that can be considered healthy. A healthy organization is a function of its workforce. A workforce that is well, a workforce that is motivated, a workforce that has that positive energy is what really makes an organization healthy and sustainable. And supervisors have a critical role in doing that, in keeping the workforce in a state that can contribute to organizational health. Now, we are all still in the midst of a pandemic, and sort of this last year has had its impact on our workforce, and in some ways it's exaggerated a lot of what I'm going to be presenting here in terms of burnout and in terms of compassion fatigue, because the conditions under which people have had to work have been extreme. But just to illustrate, and just to kind of give you a sense of what people are dealing with, there was a study recently conducted by Mental Health America, where they interviewed or evaluated 1,119 healthcare workers. And they did this in the middle of COVID, which was sometime last spring, late spring, early summer. And of the 1,119 people who were interviewed, what they found is that 93% were experiencing stress. 86% reported experiencing anxiety. 77% reported frustration. 76% reported exhaustion and burnout. And 75% said they were overwhelmed. 76% of healthcare workers with children reported that they were worried about exposing their child to COVID-19. And nearly half were worried about exposing their spouse or partner. And 47% were worried they would expose their older family members. Again, emotional exhaustion, an 82%, trouble with sleep, 70%, physical exhaustion, 68%, changes in appetite and headaches and stomach ache, 56 and 57%. And sort of these high numbers of people who, under these conditions, found it personally and physically difficult to withstand. Now, I bring this up because we're all in the middle of this, and we're all still facing this, and it kind of puts an emphasis on how do we supervise under these conditions. But I want to say that even outside of these conditions, and I don't want people to sort of get lost in, COVID and the impact of COVID and think about this strictly in that way. But the occupational hazards, with or without a pandemic, are difficult enough and stressful enough that even without a pandemic, much of what we're going to talk about today applies. So what we want to do when we look at supervision through this mindful lens is, first of all, to recognize and appreciate the undermining and depleting power of these occupational hazards, exacerbated by a pandemic, but there anyway. And those are, just to reiterate, the continuous exposure to the pain and suffering of others, the potential triggering of workers' own pain and suffering, personalization and blurring of boundaries, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And what we want to do is build resilience so that not only in normal circumstances are people able to manage these occupational hazards, but also when there is a crisis, when there is a pandemic or some other crisis that builds on the stressors, that adds to the stressors, that we have a workforce and we have a supervisory structure that can withstand sort of the ill winds, that can withstand the tsunami, if you will, of that impact of that situation. So let's think about, if we look at supervision through a mindful lens, let's think about being strengths-based and person-centered. Now, we apply these terms in terms of the work we do with the people we serve, but to look at those also in terms of a supervision and a supervisory relationship, to view supervision through a parallel process lens. That is, as supervisors, the way we manage supervision with the people who we supervise is going to get reflected in the way those people manage their relationships with the people the organization serves. So there is a direct relationship between how we supervise and how services are provided. We have to know, and we have to know this, it's an important thing to maintain the kind of that motivation and that positive energy. We know when we have to know when to be more collegial and consultative as supervisors than evaluative. Yes, there's a component of supervision where we evaluate, and there's a component of supervision where we have to be task oriented, but there are certain kinds of sort of roles that we play as supervisors that should not be judgmental and evaluative, but should be collegial and consultative. That could be, that is what will bring out the innovation. That is what will bring out the sort of the creativity of the staff, is that when we can change how as I say it, moving out of that evaluative role as a supervisor to a more collegial and consultative role. We have to know and address the signs of compassion fatigue, and we're going to devote some time to that. And we have to actively promote and support staff wellness. Now, this is not only something that supervisors do in terms of on their own. There has to be a culture in the organization that promotes and supports staff wellness. And this has become more and more evident in the last year because there's been such an impact on staff wellness, and organizations have had a tremendous responsibility for holding on to their staff during this period and being very tuned in to staff wellness. In fact, at the executive seminar, I believe, right, Daniela, we're going to be talking to some providers about this in a webinar called Taking Charge to Recharge Your Workforce. Am I right about that, Daniela? What's the date for that?
Yeah, that's correct. And so the seminar is this year, it'll be virtual again, and it's taking place over 3 days. So that particular workshop or panel discussion is taking place on the first day of seminar, which is Tuesday, April 20th, so next week. So the 3 dates for executive seminar are the 20th, the 22nd, and the 28th. And you can register for the seminar by going to the NIAPRS website.
Yeah, and in this particular one that I'm talking about, Take Charge to Recharge Your Workforce, we're going to hear from providers and what they've been doing. So I highly recommend this as sort of a part 2 of this presentation on this particular topic. So how do we apply mindfulness and trauma responsive care principles to the practice of supervision? So let's get down to sort of where the rubber meets the road. So let's look at it first of all from what trauma responsive care is, and this is SAMHSA's sort of definition. And I think that these principles apply. So when you think about your role as a supervisor, think about ensuring physical and emotional safety. Think about maximizing trust, making tasks clear and maintaining appropriate boundaries, respect, and in particular, being non-judgmental. Think about peer support. Think about having an environment where there is trust not only between supervisor and supervisee, but where there's team spirit and mutuality across the board, where employees can sort of rely on each other and feel safe with each other. We want to empower our workforce. We want to give them a voice and we want to give them choices. And so how can we do that? How can we offer choice and control whenever possible? How can we promote decision-making and giving people the power to make decisions independently and to, again, look at them and engage them through their strengths, in particular when they are faced with challenges. We want to have a culture of collaboration and mutuality, a sharing of power. This is very important in terms of keeping people's morale up, keeping people feeling like they have a stake, and keeping them kind of engaged in the decision-making processes of the organization. Now, this doesn't mean that people are being asked to make decisions that they aren't capable of making, but it's rather within the scope of their jobs, within the scope of their strengths and abilities to have a space for them to exercise their own power and their own ability to choose. And then we want to pay attention and never forget cultural, historical, and gender issues, issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and certainly in terms of systemic racism, that we have to keep that conversation going, and we have to bring people into the organization who are equipped to bring these issues to light and to help people kind of understand and learn and know that they're working in environments where there's an appreciation for cultural, historical, and gender issues. So this is sort of, if you will, the filter through which what I mean by mindful supervision. And we're gonna sort of tackle some of these and look at them more closely. So if we look at elements of mindful and trauma responsive supervision, these are the things, I mean, if you can kind of emblazon these images, We want to provide safety. We want to cultivate trustworthy relationships, and we want to give people the ability to manage reactions to stress. And so this is a sort of an encapsulation, if you will, of thinking about mindful supervision and applying the work, doing the work of providing supervision. We want to look at what we're doing through these three lenses. And so let's look more closely at what is a trauma-informed supervisory environment. I mean, what does that look like? So concretely, the supervisory meetings need to take place in a space that is private and ensures confidentiality. We want our staff to do that with the people we serve. And it's only right, if we're going to model it, that we conduct supervision in the same way. The space should be comfortable and free of distraction. The scheduling should be consistent. I've worked in an organization where supervision happened on the fly. It happened, I guess, when the two people involved were in the same space and they each had 5 minutes to spare. That is not supervision. Supervision should be scheduled, it should be consistent, it should be regular. And I know that people right now are looking up and rolling their eyes and saying, how can we do that? We have so much work to do. There's so much on our plates. How can we even schedule? Even when we try to schedule lunch, we can't get to go. Okay, fine, I hear that, I know that, I've lived that, but I'm gonna tell you something. This is an important part of the payoff. If you make the space and the time for this way, you are going to prevent a lot of extra time taken up when things don't go right. So this is an investment. If you do it at the front end, you're going to save a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of negativity on the back end. So, you know, take my word for it or don't, but I'm telling you that this is something that pays off if it's done this way. Expectations should be clear and predictable. One of the most distracting things for a worker is when they don't know what's expected of them and when there's no predictability in their lives, when things happen arbitrarily. And I think that a supervisor's role is to make the world of the employee predictable as much as possible. We know we're dealing in an environment that has a lot of unpredictability, but we can contribute as supervisors to that unpredictability. To the extent that we can make the world predictable, we should be doing that. We should be very clear about the limits of confidentiality. Although we want to establish a trustworthy relationships, there are limits to that. And I think we need to go over that and talk about when confidentiality cannot be maintained. We want to have a lot of collaboration with the supervisee around what we're going to be doing in supervision. Is it what they need? And in as much as the supervisor has a need to do certain things in supervision, we need to incorporate what the supervisee's needs are. We want to convey that the organization is genuinely interested and active in supporting their wellness. And again, this cannot come from a supervisee alone. It must be something that exists in the culture of the organization. We want to keep hope. And keep that hopefulness even in the most dire circumstances. That's an important component of that relationship. And safety, again, has to be key. We don't want an employee to be distracted by feelings of not being safe and needing to be protective. Rather, we want them to feel safe so that they can be present and do the jobs as optimally as possible. Okay. So I'm going to repeat some of this, but the elements of a trauma-informed supervisory relationship is we would like to welcome self-disclosure, but we also want to be able to decide when we're going to refer the person to resources outside of the supervisory relationship to manage that to manage the content of that self-disclosure. But we don't want to stifle a person being able to talk about whatever they want. We just may not entertain it as part of our supervisory role. So in that light, we want the content of the discussion to be unrestricted. We want sometimes and often to keep the supervisee to lead the conversations with what they're coming in for. So the supervision should meet the needs of the supervisee more than the needs of the supervisor. Again, elicit creativity and innovation. In order to do that, we need to be emotionally present. We want to be able to listen and observe and not judge in order to maintain the supervisee's sense of safety and freedom to talk about what's important to them. We want to get feedback periodically. Is this working for the person? You know, supervisees are very often in a position where they're afraid to, you know, their jobs depend on how their supervisor perceives them, right? So they're much less likely to be critical unless it's invited. And so a good supervisor who wants a relationship that kind of enhances the worker's experience is to periodically ask, is this working for you? How's this going? And to open the dialogue so that the person can really share whether it is or whether it isn't. We want to focus on the person's strengths. We want to be able to identify distress when it's there and allow the person to talk about that, because that's what the safety and promoting safety is about, is helping the person develop the resilience to be able to manage those stressful situations. Again, the wellness piece comes in being able to recommend to the person things that they can do on the job and off the job to manage some of the stress that they may be expressing, that they're feeling. And we want to have resources to refer them to. And again, all of this builds into a relationship that is about trust. It's that trust. It's one of those initial principles of trauma-informed and trauma-responsive care, is the trustworthy relationship. So in that light, so let's look at, you know, some of the things that we do and that we don't do. We want to acknowledge and support feelings and resiliency, but again, we have to be careful not to give too much direction or unsolicited advice. We don't want to assume that we know what's best, but we want to elicit what the supervisee thinks it's best. And we want to encourage the supervisee to identify their strengths, their needs, and resources that they have. We want to also offer them connection to external resources that might be helpful. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but if we're going to be sort of in that relationship in a real way, we have to maintain some boundaries. But at the same time, we want to be real and present for the person. And we want the person to be able to bring to us what might be interfering in their ability to do their job as effectively as possible. So this is a delicate relationship, right? I'm asking people here, and I'm suggesting that we kind of know ourselves well enough and to be able to make these distinctions and to be able to carry supervision in a way that's not restrictive, but at the same time doesn't take us down a rabbit hole that we don't want to go through. So I've put together some of the ways in which, or the questions you could ask when a person brings up something that sort of is a difficult conversation. So we can reflect and say, that must have been stressful, difficult, or painful. How did you, or how are you coping with that? Have you shared this with anyone? What have you done or are you going to do to get by? How do you manage your stress in situations like this? Who do you talk to when you feel worried or stressed like this? How has this been affecting you? What can I do to make sure that you are getting what you need? What can I do to support you in taking care of yourself? So do you see, these are the kinds of things where we're hearing the person and letting the person kind of lead us and helping the person to identify what they bring in terms of resiliency to these difficult situations. And again, you know, to be able to say to the person, I appreciate all of the hard work and dedication that you are putting into this case, right? And I'm sure the client and family does as well. Are you taking time for yourself to recharge? And then, you know, are you taking vacation time? We want to encourage people to be well. And so we want them to take time off. We want them to be able to have opportunities and places where they can recharge, because we're asking them to do very difficult work. So are there any questions about this? Because this sometimes elicits a lot of reactions in participants. Does anybody want to say anything about what we just talked about? Anything in the chat box, Daniela?
No, Eve, there's nothing in the chat box right now.
Okay. All right, good. So I'm glad that 2 participants raised hand. I just got that signal. So I don't see who they are.
I'm not sure that we can unmute people just because there's so many people on the line. So if those folks who had their hands raised, if you could just type your comments or your questions in the chat box, we would appreciate it.
Okay, we just
I see. They just wrote something in. Yeah. So what if the boss doesn't ask these types of questions, yet there's a need to have some things acknowledged that are painful, is the first question.
So when you say the boss here, are you talking about the supervisor here? I imagine that you are. You know, I would like to answer that question in a different way, but I think this kind of give and take, or this kind of ability to be able to, if there is something going on in the supervisee and they don't have that kind of relationship, then I would say the person has to gauge, will the supervisor be receptive if I share this with them? And if you don't think that the person will be receptive, then I think that, you know, obviously you're in a supervisory relationship that doesn't have this essence to it. And so in that regard, I would say bring it to someone who you know who will be receptive in the organization or outside of the organization. Unfortunately, people are in supervisory relationships which do not reflect what we're talking about today. What was the other comment, Daniela?
Yeah, so there's another comment. This is a really interesting one. They say it's tough. Cheryl says it's tough because sometimes we don't actually have the power to do the things that they identify that would help.
We don't have the power to do the things. Oh,
so as supervisors, they don't have the power to make those changes. Yeah.
I get that. Well, there are limits to everything. I mean, the thing is how to work within those limits. I mean, you know, you can't really create or invent, solutions. Sometimes you have to work within the structure that you have, and then help the person. If it's not going to be available within the structure that you have, then to help the person identify areas and places outside of that structure. I totally agree with you. There are limits. Hopefully, organizations will take up more of this and more of this philosophy, and there won't be as many limits. But yes, many of you are working within limits, and I think you have to acknowledge that they exist. You can invent things that aren't there, but you can certainly help the person, again, by identifying their own strengths and their own resources and guide them towards that, because you can't, obviously, within the structures that you're working with, provide the answers or the solutions that you think might be helpful. So when you want to build a mindful and resiliency-based supervisory relationships, you want to observe supervisees in their day-to-day work activities so that you can refer to real performance examples in supervision. So you really don't want to imply, and you don't want to make things up, but you want it to be real in the sense that you're talking about something that you've actually observed in the person's life, in the person's work life. You want to be open to their sharing of feelings and reactions to challenging situations. And to answer the question, you want to invite them to come up with their own strategies for coping with those situations. So again, this is that strengths-based and to build on those strengths with them. You want to know what employees, what supervisees personally value, what they're challenged by, and what they're rewarded by in their work. And you want to help them find meaning based on that, based on those sort of very personal, those personal values, and strengthen those. So if they don't have meaning, you want to help them find it. And if they have meaning in their work, you want to help them keep it. The worst thing for anyone is when the work becomes meaningless. So you want to learn what those things are, and you want to cultivate them in the people you work with. And you want to encourage supervisees to develop their own self-care plans, to check in from time to time, and you want to check in from time to time as to how it's working. So again, it's acknowledging for the person, look, this is a difficult job. How are you taking care of yourself? And if you're not going to bring stuff up, then I'm going to take the initiative and ask you from time to time, how are things going? Are you taking care of yourself? And this is what kind of becomes, that real, I guess the best way to say it is that real relationship that is trustworthy, that real relationship that gives the person this sense of safety within the organization. So when an employee, when a supervisee does come in and does kind of bring to the supervisory dialogue the stress that they're experiencing, again, the supervisor can help them to kind of identify how that might interfere with their job performance. And that becomes part of the job and the support that the supervisor provides the supervisee in terms of doing their job. And then to help the supervisee identify their strengths as to how they might cope with that to prevent a decline in their job performance. So it's to kind of help the supervisee identify, hey, this is how I've coped with this stuff in the past, and it worked, and these are the things that I bring to the table that help me manage, that help me find solutions to work-related problems. And to support that it's not something that you always feel you have to give the solution to the supervisee, but to help the supervisee find their own solution within the context of their own strengths. And you want to help the supervisee use mindfulness strategies to handle these occupational hazards. And what I mean by that is you want the supervisee to kind of be able to be present in situations and to distinguish and to be able to kind of tease out the issues that they're grappling with every day, and to tease out, what it is that they can address, what it is that they need support with, and what it is that may come from their own sort of triggers and stress triggers, so that you're helping the person distinguish and be able to kind of pay attention, because what mindfulness is particularly that it's pay attention to and distinguish between what's happening in the present and how they might respond to it, rather than get sucked into something else that has to do with their own stress reaction. So there is lots of available online. If you just Google mindfulness strategies, you'll find a wealth of information there around how to help people get grounded and how to help people find ways to make those distinctions. So now let's get into resilience, compassion, fatigue, and self-care. And this is more, understanding it, looking at it sort of under a microscope, because I think we've talked a lot about this up to this point, but let's get a little bit closer. So what is resilience? Resilience is a function of an individual's temperament, personality, competence, perseverance, intelligence, commitment to learning, future orientation, self-efficacy, and self-esteem. So this is sort of the inherent attributes that a person brings to their jobs and to wherever they go and to whatever relationships they have. And so there's going to be great variability from individual to individual in how these things play out in their ability to cope with the stressful jobs that they have. So we as supervisors have to look at sort of how we build resilience. And so when we look at these things, and again, there's going to be variability in what people bring in, we want to maximize all of this. We want to bring all of this to a point where it is maximized for the individual in terms of their own sort of inherent abilities. Now, everybody has limitations, so we have to recognize that too. But our role is to cultivate all of this in a way that it brings the person to maximum capacity to do their job. So the pillars are a strength-based approach, a trustworthy and reliable supervisory relationship. And again, trustworthy and reliable here, we talked about what that means. It means consistency, it means availability, it means all those things that makes a person trust. We want to cultivate a trustworthy peer network. So we want to create an environment where people can rely on each other. And we do that by facilitating team building and by actually encouraging people to solve problems within the context of their peers, because if you can appreciate that, if you take everybody's experience and bundle it together, you're going to get a lot more out of it than what you would find in everybody's singular experience. So there is sort of a synergistic effect here around pooling experience and strengths. You also want to have supervision that incorporates collaboration and empowerment. And this is where you build people's resilience by giving them the opportunity to have power and to take control and to make decisions. And then also to allow, and I don't have that here, but to allow mistakes within a certain range and to help people learn from those mistakes. Nobody's mistake proof. And I think, mistakes are important if they are then used as a place for learning. And then you want hope. You want there always to be this underlying sense that, no situation or very few situations are beyond hope, that there's always that sense of possibility. And possibility and potential are important in keeping people's morale and keeping people's interest in their job. So as a supervisor, you can teach supervisees to identify and address emotional and cognitive depletion, which is what burnout is. What we're talking about here is you can strengthen a person's resilience to more effectively manage the impact of highly stressful work conditions and situations. You can create supervisory environment that builds resilience and supersedes individual factors. So that what I said before is that everybody comes with sort of a certain amount or a certain reservoir of resilience through those individual characteristics, and that you can help people maximize those so that they can then work at peak performance. And you can provide very real support and guidance regarding management of work-related stressors. But of course, you can't do that unless you validate the fact that the individual has those stressors and that you welcome their ability to express that, or you welcome their expression of those stressors when they bring that to you, and then that you help them find their own way of managing rather than imposing how you would manage it. So this takes more time and it takes more energy, but it certainly is the thing, I believe, that keeps people satisfied and energized in the work that they do. So compassion fatigue is also referred to as secondary traumatic stress. It's a natural consequence of work in the human services field. It can interfere with job performance, and it can have serious health outcomes for people who are both providing services and people who are receiving services. If the person who is providing the services can't do their job effectively, then that's going to result ultimately in poor outcomes for the people that are being served. So again, you know, this is a triple parallel, right? The supervisor in his relationship with the supervisee, and then the impact of that on the supervisee's health and how to optimize health is through a mindful and resiliency-based approach to supervision. Similarly, the supervisee in working with people that the organization serves is going to have an impact on the health outcomes for them. So at the end of the day, this is sort of really about everybody's health and everybody's safety. And so, you know, this has to start at the top. And of course, it can be much more beneficial to everyone involved if there's a culture, if the organization's culture is one that is that reflects these principles of mindfulness, these principles of being trauma responsive. So this is a much bigger, I will say, and can be much bigger. But nevertheless, even if an organization hasn't totally adopted these principles, within the individual supervisory relationship, these can still be applied to great advantage for the organization. What I'm saying here is that it's much easier when it's all happening within a cultural context, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it even if that larger culture is not quite, doesn't quite exist. So just to, again, under the microscope, to identify compassion fatigue, it's usually the symptoms are irritability, apathy, loss of motivation. You know all this, first of all, because you've probably all experienced it yourself. There's no way that any of us can work in this field for any length of time without coming close to some of this in some way. And for all of us who have been, who have experienced this, for those of us who are still in the field, we've all figured out ways to sort of deal with this. And hopefully because we have enough insight to identify these things in ourselves, but hopefully that we also may have a supervisor in a trustworthy relationship who can bring it to our attention, or a trustworthy peer, a colleague who can bring it to our attention. And so in a trustworthy environment, a peer can tell one of their colleagues, can say, look, I noticed that, you know, you're really, you know, you're really irritable these days. What's going on? And so, you know, this is the kind of culture that you want to have so that people can really help and support each other. Again, we're working in very, very difficult environments. And again, I bring back COVID into the picture. This last year has been horrific in terms of eliciting compassion fatigue in our workforce. And I think it's going to have an impact, by the way, for the next few years, even as we move out of COVID, which hopefully we are on that course. I think that we're going to have to sort of deal with the impact on our workforce for a few years beyond now. So again, this secondary traumatic stress is another term that you may come across. And, you know, I want just to say that if you want to read more about this, I put it up as a slide, you know, with some commentary. But there's more about this. If you go to the SAMHSA website, I think you'll find a lot of information on this. But the takeaway here is that you want to, as a supervisor, your helping depends on your knowing your supervised level of distress and arousal. You want to be able to identify it, and you want to be able to address it in a kind way, in a respectful way, in a way that helps them figure out how to deal with it, in a way that helps them build resilience in dealing with it. And that can only happen in an environment where, within the supervisory relationship, and where the person feels that they are safe within that relationship, and where they feel that the relationship is trustworthy. So again, keeping all of this in mind, again, not an easy thing to accomplish, but certainly something that is important, and that there be an overlay in the organization of employee or workforce wellness. That the organization, if nothing else, is conscious that if their workforce is not well, then their outcomes are not going to be met. Their reason for being there will not be achieved, because an organization is nothing but the capacity of its workforce to deliver the outcomes that the organization strives for. So I think that this idea of workforce wellness should not be something that's kept sort of out there, but rather something that becomes integrated into how the organization operates. So how can you prevent and minimize compassion fatigue? Recognize, appreciate the occupational hazards. Train supervisors to conduct supervision through a mindful and strengths-based lens. Cultivate the organizational culture that genuinely believes in and actively supports and invests in employee self-care and wellness. And of course, let hope be your compass. Now, self-care, it's not that simple, but it's something that people should be made conscious of on their own, and for their own, finding their own ways to pursue it. Because if people come to work exhausted because they have not figured out how to use exercise, diet, sleep, abstaining from substance use, pursuing creative outlets, again, all these things need to be, some organizations actively provide some of these things to folks. And I know an organization that has Meditation Fridays, where they bring a meditation specialist into the organization, and people can, the person's there all day, and people can come in and participate in ways to de-stress. There are also self-taught ways to relax. And again, if you go online and you Google relaxation techniques, you'll find a host of things, a host of resources that you as a supervisor can give to your supervisees. So there's a lot to this. It's not simple, but an organization that encourages it, that provides the resources for people, whether directly or indirectly, by letting them know where to go to find answers or to find methodology for self-care. I think that's very important as part of this whole mindful and stress management that supervision involves. So the summary: why do we do all this? Why mindful supervision? And there's been some research on this and these are some of those things. And we have sort of studies that have given us a lot of information. So mindful supervision promotes staff retention and reduces turnover. It reduces levels of vicarious trauma experienced by staff. It influences supervisee ability to more effectively cope with their work, and is associated with greater resilience among workers. It enhances worker well-being by strengthening ties to the organization and increasing affiliation with the larger field. And it facilitates and supports effective dissemination and sustainability of best practices. So this isn't just sort of an opinion here, but rather that there has been more rigorous study of why this kind of approach to supervision yields positive results organizationally and personally. So mindful and resilience-informed supervision increases safety for all, improves the social environment, cares for the caregivers, increases the quality of services, reduces negative encounters and events, creates a community of hope and health, and increases success and satisfaction at work. And I think probably a lot of other things that would be more personal to individuals, where people could talk, and if you could hear their voices, they would say more personal things about how satisfied and how enhanced their experience of work. You know, we talk a lot now about the importance of the experience of people being served, of the people we serve in our organization. There are now actually in industry, you know, while there have always been chief executive officers and, you know, chief operational people and so on, there's now a new title that's come up in industry, in business, which is called a chief experience officer. And that person's job is to check in and try to improve the experience of customers. And I think that if somebody in HR is on this webinar, to think about the HR department checking in and being able to assess and evaluate the experience of the workforce as a gauge from which to then guide the organization in terms of training and in terms of supervisory training in particular. So we want the experience of the workforce to be one that can contribute to the organizational health and hence to the organization's ability to produce the outcomes that it stands for. So here are some references that you can you know, refer to and kind of go deeper into this if you so choose. So I think we have about a minute, right, Daniela? I'm sorry about that, but if people want to stay on, I can stay on for a few more minutes. Are there any questions?
There are no questions in the chat box yet, but there was a comment that I wanted to share. This person chatted in that they appreciate the care and importance of the relationship that you emphasize throughout the presentation. So I just wanted to share that with everyone, and we're getting lots of comments. Wonderful presentation. Thanks so much. But we do have another minute, so if anybody wants to chat in a question, please feel free to do that. All right, and I just want to remind everyone that the presentation, the recording for the presentation, as well as the slides will be made available on the NIAPRS website. And you can access that at www.niaprs.org. So yeah, it looks like we are done for today. I guess you've taken care of all the questions throughout the presentation, Eve, so thanks for that. I want to say thank you to all of our participants who came today and who come every month for our free webinar series, and a special thanks to you, Eve, for presenting today.
It was my pleasure. I wish everybody well, be well, and take care of yourselves.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.